Good day, good night, good sunset, sunrise. Hello, everyone. So I had a episode ready to go for today, but here I am yesterday, from the time that you're hearing this as it just comes out, uh, deciding no, I actually want to do another episode on another topic that's just popped into my head, and then we can get back into regularly scheduled programming. Basically, this is just me just being like, man, podcasting has been a trip. It's it's gotten easier. I'm still trying to figure things out, but that's just normal. I'm more of a execute an idea guy than I am like post work guy, which is crazy because I love editing video, I love editing music, and that's a post production thing. But when it comes to actually like finding the time to write everything out, get like Patreon up and going, trying to figure out if I want to do stuff for patrons that are exclusive, and just finding ways to just kind of keep my creativity going, to keep my sanity going. It just takes a lot of time away from doing the post part, which is doing a proper episode description, making sure I got the Patreon link right. See if there's a way I can actually make the Patreon link a little more streamlined and easier once I post everything or paste everything. Um, trying to see how things look from the listener perspective. So going on like the Spotify app and making sure like, okay, so this is kind of what it looks like for me now. Let me see what it looks like for everyone else. See how other people are kind of doing it and structuring it. And not trying to mimic success, but just try because obviously there's a way for a lot of listeners that just if they want to go into the description and look at links or look at a link dump to find out more information, it's like there's a set format that a lot of people tend to follow for their shows because it's very easy to digest, very quick, very just straight to the point. And people get used to that. People, especially when there's something new comes out, people try to figure out like or see how things are for this new thing, and then they become a creature of habit, knowing that okay, well, this is always going to be there. This is always going to be here when it deals with this because this is how they do it. And most of it now, like, is at least 95% the same. No matter what shows or anything you're listening to or checking out. Audio shows, not like TV shows. And so just trying to figure out like I guess the proper trying to get a consensus over how most of it looks and how it's easily laid out so that I can just make things a little bit easier and again a little more easy to digest and easy to find. But um, it's crazy to think that Jesus, like 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, we started. I started podcasting, and it was a fun venture for what it was, but it had a lot of challenges. And the reason why I want to talk about this today is because I was just sitting there thinking on while me and my wife were driving around running our errands, like, oh, I got to put out the episode for tomorrow. I got to write the description. I got to get the link going. And should I record an episode today on the road? Like, what would I even want to talk about? What am I in the mood to talk about? And I was like, this has gotten so much easier than when I started. When I started, it was me and my cousin in our closet in a shared apartment in our closet, recording the first episode, trying to get everyone to get a feel for our personalities and who we are while we're wanting to do a podcast. And then after that, just kind of taking off from there. We always tried to have like a three-person crew. Um, we had a girl named Steph on the show with us because she was our neighbor, and she just loved hanging out with us. She loved being a part of our conversations, and she was just a character overall. She contributed a lot to our shared dynamic. But then there were bigger dreams than probably what was achievable for that podcast. I wanted to keep it kind of like the Rooster Teeth podcast. And this is in Rooster Teeth. It was like in its golden era. I guess a lot of fans called it that. Where they would just sit down on the couch, four people, and just shoot the shit. But it was, like, and one thing I didn't understand about that point, or didn't grasp me, was that these are already established on air personalities for the company, and they were the personalities that the fans loved the most. And so if you just put them on a show and just say, hey, just talk for 90 minutes, an hour 45, people are just going to sit there and listen and going to get like the craziest uh, audience and the craziest views, all the sponsorships, all the money, the fame, what have you. And then, but as they progressed into doing not just audio podcasts, but they started doing video podcasts, and it seemed like it inspired a lot of people to just start podcasting. And at the time that I was starting to do it, it was fucking crazy. So much to learn, so much to try and keep track of. If you've ever, probably, I don't know if any of y'all have ever listened to um, the Beyond the Screenplay podcast. Uh, Back in let's say about like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, when the Spotify for Podcasters app was actually called Anchor before they was purchased by Spotify. Um, be, Before that, all that change, he had an ad because I had to go on like so many tangents to describe this, but they had an ad where because Anchor was a way to make it easier for anyone who wanted to start a podcast, get it going. You didn't need all the crazy technology for it. You literally just needed the app on your phone, and you can use a mic on your phone. You can use headsets. You can use anything that could plug into your phone through Bluetooth or through the Lightning, USB-C port, what have you, that was compatible with your device. But then they're like, you can also make money off of this, and so we will give you your first sponsorship by just putting us out there. So Anchor gave you if you chose to do it, a they're like you have to record a 30-second spot that you can just play and talk about the app, and we want you to hit these points. But Michael from Beyond the Screenplay, he was talking about how when he was thinking about starting the podcast, that doing research on it, it was like trying to get the right mics, trying to get good equipment, to get the best sounding audio, trying to get people to show up, and then RSS feeds, which RSS feeds were just a pain and a half to understand. But it's like you had to have all these separate things and keep track of everything, so that way that was your show essentially. That was the livelihood for your show, especially the RSS feed. The RSS feed is you have a place where you publish your podcast, and they would give you an RSS feed, and that was the link to you would put into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify to essentially link your show to those sites and distribute it to those sites. We went through two different podcast sites, hosting sites. One was podcast it was a Podcast Garden, and I forgot what the other one was, but both are. I think Podcast Garden is still around. They were just uh, they were okay for what they were. I'm not really going to talk too bad about them, especially since they gave us like our first home, a Podbean. I think it was the main one. I think the first one went to not Podcast Garden. Maybe it was like either or. I think Podbean was the second one. But anyway, now I'm like really confused. Anyway, so like the first web uh, podcast website where we would post our podcast to. Um, they were like, hey, like you can have a free account, but if you do a free account, like you have to shorten your episodes down to I think like 15 or 20 minutes. I'm like, we can easily talk for an hour, hour and a half. That's what the show length or the episode lengths are. Is about an hour, hour and a half of just us shooting shit every week. And they're like, if you want to have it longer than that, you have to pay for a subscription, and the subscription price was like $35 a month. Living in LA at the time and trying to be like, this is something I really want to invest into, and I need to make sure I have money for it because this is kind of getting our name out there. This is helping us. Uh, just one, kind of talk about our experience in the industry, and two, just getting us out there. So like, let's just put our personalities out there. Let's kind of talk about certain projects if we can. If they're not, we didn't have to sign an NDA, but we won't fully say like the name or talk too much about it, just to kind of keep people interested and intrigued. But yeah, it was just after looking at it, it was like way too expensive. I think it was actually Podbean, but like $35 a month. And what $35 a month got us was we could post however long the shows we wanted for episodes, however long we wanted, however many uploads. I think the free version also limited you to, I think like five, two or five. I think it was like two episodes a month. No, 5 episodes a month. It was 5 episodes a month you could post, and we were starting to branch out too with like because a lot of my friends found out we were podcasting, and they wanted to do their own podcast show, but they didn't know how to go about that. So I just threw them out like, hey, like, what do you want to talk about? We can just put it under my show name and just kind of do like a spin-off show where it's not the Austin Guy podcast, it's Austin Guy Wrestling, because we had a friend who really wanted to do a wrestling podcast where we talked about wrestling news, everything that was going on the world of wrestling. We had one that wanted to do music, so we had Austin Guy Music. What else do we have? We had Austin Guy Films, which we talked about movies we watched, upcoming movies, things that we were excited about, projects we worked on. Not necessarily like projects, like specific projects, but just experiences during that week where we were just like, hey, let's talk about this because either, we just learned this and we didn't learn that in film school, or we just had this experience and it was either helpful or hurtful. And so it was just, we got to the point where we had 4 shows going and we were putting out 4 shows a week. Uh, Podbean, you could schedule out the episodes like you can on Spotify for podcasters, which was amazing. Um, just because I can get everything done, um, get the audio posted up once it was mixed, and then just have it ready to go, ready to post on the day it needed to be posted, and then just have others focus my attention on everything else. But when the $35 allowed us to post as many times as we wanted, so we weren't limited to just 5 shows a month or 5 episodes a month, since we had more shows coming, we were churning out like 20 episodes almost a month when we were at our peak for it. And it could be as long as we wanted. I think the maximum amount was almost like 3 or 4 hours, and we're like, we're not really going to be podcasting that long. One, because we would easily run out of things to talk about for like the next week or two. Uh, but and then they also gave you analytics too, which it seemed like there was some bots go analytics going on in there because we we got a lot of traffic according to those analytics, but it was like European traffic, which was weird. Like we had a lot of viewer listeners in Germany, and I was like, I don't know if this is just like they were legit listeners or just bots that were coming off of a server in Germany, just giving us listens to make it seem like Podbean was actually doing something for us. And then we moved to Podcast Garden because I ended up now being out of work for about 2 months and moved back to Texas from LA and still trying to find a job. I'm still doing the podcast, change of crew. Obviously, cut back on shows such as the one show, the main podcast show, and trying to afford our distributor website. So it was like 35 was just too much, and I think they were gonna up it to I think 40, 45. Like that's I can't do that. Uh, that's not viable and it's not sustainable. Uh, we just gotta find something else. We found Podcast Garden, who gave us almost the same things, minus the analytics, because the analytics cost extra. But I didn't really care too much about the analytics. I just wanted to mainly focus on the show and try and hit my overall goal, which one of my film school mentors encouraged me to keep podcasting. So I mainly did it because he said, just keep at it. Eventually it'll go somewhere. And, you'll be beside me at E3 one day with your own press badge, and we'll be rocking it out, having a good time. Well, we hope E3 is gone now. Uh, but we switched over to Podcast Garden. Podcast Garden was $10 a month, which gave us unlimited uploads. Didn't have a set time limit, so we could have did a 10-hour episode and it still would have been fine. They were just looking. It seemed like they were looking for people to just get on and get their own name going. The only drawback with them was we got their RSS feed, but uh, trying to find other podcast sites that it could distribute to that were accept its RSS feed was very difficult. So we just kept it on Podcast Garden. YouTube wasn't doing podcasts so much. We got kicked off Apple because of Podbean, because again, also not just because of Podbean, but when we were on Podbean, because again, like I mentioned in one episode, I don't know if it was recorded last week or what, but Apple wants certain metrics to be hit, so you can request to have your podcast on there, and I think we did it. We put in our request like 10 episodes in, 15 episodes in, and they're like, yeah, sure. It seems like you guys are getting in the swing of things. Oh, we'll go ahead and put you guys up so people can find you on Apple Podcasts, and then after about 2 weeks, they're like, yeah, you only got like 5 listeners through us. So we usually strive to have a minimum of like I think 10 or there was like 50 I think listeners per month. It was like, oh shit. I think the most we got up to on Apple Podcasts was like 10 or 12. They're like, yeah, you're just not hitting that 50 mark for us. We're going to go ahead and remove Austin Guy Podcast from Apple Podcasts. But once you get your audience back up, it would be beneficial for you to have your podcast with us or distributed through us. Feel free to apply again, kind of thing. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll just wait. Like, I think that most we got was probably like 25 listens per episode. But when I started it all, I had a single hand recorder for field mic work. For when just recording audio out when we were doing film, you could hook like 2 microphones up to it. They would still do like just one feed. But it also had like a handheld option where you could just attach a hand holder to it, a hand grip to it, and just use it as like a regular microphone. And that was like a $300 microphone that I got for free from school. So I ended up looking up the same brand and finding that they had a bunch of smaller handheld mics that were also just as good audio quality. And they were like, let's say like 70 or 80 bucks each. Um, Now mom helped me out. She paid for one, I paid for the other. So that's how we got the three mics. And we were just using those handheld to record. So everyone had their own uh, micro SSD in the each recorder. Um, Everyone had their levels set. So I essentially like labeled kind of everyone's microphone because it had settings set for them to where it could pick them up prominently because like Steph, she was a little bit of a soft talker. My cousin, very, very loud talker, just naturally loud. So like the settings were toned down on the sensitivity on his so that way he could sound normal volume. It was boosted on Steph's so she could sound normal, and then on mine, I think it was boosted a little bit too so I could sound normal. But then I would take all three feeds, put them into Audition, um, sync them up, adjust the volumes as needed, trim a little bit if needed, not necessarily like cut out any parts of the conversations, just because our conversations never really went anywhere offensive or into a realm where it's like, no, would change our public perception if we ever had one. Uh, so it was just like trim, like the excess start point or excess end point, like most audiophiles do, just to kind of give you a little bit of leeway. And then doing all the normalizing, decompressing, compressing again, and then exporting in the proper format to be uploaded. And so it's a lot of work, and it was all mainly just me. Cousin and Steph were mainly just the personalities to help keep things going and keep things lively. And then when I moved back to Texas, I had to find another friend group that was looking into that. And so Brian, aka Jarrell from Almost Nerds, wanted to get into podcasting. So he became kind of a regular on the show just to kind of learn how things go. He was very, very ambitious at the start with kind of like me thinking we needed to buy a mixer, we needed to buy, professional mics that ran off of that were XLR mics, and XLR is like the microphone cables that connect to a sound mixer. So it's like we need a four mic sound mixer. We need to learn how to work the sound mixer. We need to like find four microphones that connect to the mixer. We need to have the four cables, the XLR cables, to connect the mics to the mixer. We need to get everyone leveled. We need to get um, like the wind guards, those little like black puppy things on the end of the microphone, because if you don't have a pop filter, those kind of are a semi-natural pop filter. For people who don't know what a pop filter is and whenever you're talking directly into a microphone, any hard syllable, it's actually like a consonant. Uh, but in case you don't know what a consonant is, it is a little bit weird and sometimes a little hard to describe. But if any word that has a hard letter in it, like a K sound or a P, a K, a T, that when you say it, you breathe out a lot of air because that's what's needed to pronounce it properly. All that air gets into the microphone. And depending upon like how sensitive the mic is and whatnot, it can peak the volume. When I say peak the volume, meaning if you're wearing headphones, you're probably going to it's going to hit really loud and you're probably going to go deaf for a second or two, if not get your ears hurt. And what a pop filter is, and what the little microphone heads are, is that a pop filter is like a little circle and it's like a double layered mesh. Um, and what that does is it's thin enough to where you can talk and it'll clearly pick you up. It doesn't really muffle you. But if you do any of those hard sounding letters, it's layered in such a way that it breaks up all that hard air that's being blown into it, and so it diffuses that pop sound. You still hear like the overall gist of the word, letter, consonant, vowel, syllable that you're saying without having all that excess noise follow it. And so it cleans up your audio a lot. And if you don't have like an actual pop filter that goes near your voice, goes near your mouth or between you and the microphone, then they have like the microphone heads that go over the microphone that also act as like a somewhat pop filter. It doesn't necessarily like fully disperse or diffuse the sound because it goes right over the head of the microphone. So some of that air is still like going through straight into the microphone. Whereas a pop filter, you have it floating essentially in between you and the microphone. So it still can have a little bit of a gap to where that air just gets dispersed or is already just completely um, dispersed before the sound gets to the microphone. So there's like the main differences between that. But yeah, like we needed all of that, and then just so that way we could look professional and do the professional style podcast we want. But then it was like, no, we're actually just doing it with like these handheld mics and an audio editing program and a distribution site. And so that after about a month or two, he finally got his stuff and started podcasting the Almost Nerds podcast, which I've jumped on every now and then just to make sure like everything's going smooth and also just be another personality, which I'll get to that in a little bit too. But it's like all of that was just really hard to just. It was difficult at first when you think about all the steps you have to take, but then once you start taking them and you start finding, oh, well, I don't need to do it at this level. Like I can do it at this level and it'll be fine. And we can just grow to the level I want it to be at. Like it's easy to start. But now, since we have apps like Spotify for podcasters, um, it's even easier now just to start a podcast. You got to come up with a name. You got to come up with a premise. You got to come up with what's going to make your show uniquely you. And like you sometimes do need to have a little bit of like a go-to talent, a very, very self-motivation, um, like self-motivated drive just to do it, especially if you're going to do it week after week. Just because at some point, eventually, everything you do does feel like work, even if you're very passionate about it. But you got to come up with a name that sticks, and I've always been kind of good. I'll come up with like several names. Even after I came up with Austin Guy Drives, I was like, okay, it's already this is the name of the show. And then 2 days later, I'm like, shit, I should just keep up with something else. Like, I am naturally that way. I can come up with a name on the spot that sounds awesome and can stick, they usually kind of work as like a temporary title. And then as I stew over it some more, or give myself a little bit of time, extra time to see if there's something I can come up that's a little bit better. I usually always do come up with something that's better. But by then, it's always like either someone else did and they already changed it, or they just like the original name and they're like, no, we already like invested in this, so we're just gonna stick with it. Okay, that's fine. None of my ideas, none of my other ideas were better anyway. So it's been a fun journey now. The main reason I kind of was wanting to do it, I've been wanting to do it for a while again, just because being every on the Almost Nerds podcast every so often in recent times. Um, I always just feel like I'm kind of part of the conversation, like I'm there, and most of the stuff they're talking about, I really don't have much to input on. I'm not like a big anime nerd. I do watch anime. I just don't watch the same animes that they do and get as into the lore of it. They're big Dragon Ball Z heads. I got out of Dragon Ball Z around halfway through the Cell Saga, so 2002, 2003-ish, and I never went back to Dragon Ball Z. But I love Sailor Moon. They're familiar with Sailor Moon. I love Attack on Titan. They're familiar with Attack on Titan. They love Full Metal Alchemist. I'm familiar with it. I've never watched a full. I have watched two full episodes, just because I was around Brian when he was binging them. But like otherwise, I've never watched Full Metal Alchemist. I've never really. It's it takes a while for me to get into an anime, especially if I'm just gonna jump into it. But if I can get into it, usually will stick with it just because it's like another TV show. I am invested now. I want to go ahead and watch it. But whenever I wanted to bring up conversations of like, oh well, I know like everyone would have a say in this, and I usually bring it up, and everyone just kind of gives their quick opinion, and then they go back to talking about whatever it is they also want to bring up. Uh, and so I was just always considering like doing another podcast, trying to figure out when, the name, how I would record, what I would want to do if I want to do more stuff later. And then lo and behold, Bernie Burns with his Morning Somewhere podcast came right back up. He started podcasting again, and he was my inspiration for podcasting to begin with. And so I was like, okay, well, he's doing it again. And it's just him and his wife. And of course, Bernie makes everything look so easy and so fun. So I was like, okay, so I can do this. And then here I am. And again, I'm older now. I am not looking to get famous off of this or rich off of this. I know my content is going to be all over the place for just certain sponsors that probably wouldn't be like the first candidate or the best candidate for. But I am happy doing this, even though it's just me. I'm happy being able to just talk about what I want to talk about. And that's to me is like the main point about it is even like at some point the Austin Guy podcast when we were our during our 3 year run, 4 year run, almost 4 year run, um, like we've actually yeah, it was about like a solid 4 year run. At some point it almost became like work, and it was all I was thinking about during my free time because it was like I need to see who's going to be on this week, who's available to record on Sunday. On Sunday I have to we have to record. Monday I'll edit and post because the episode comes out Tuesday. If we got ahead, like we record a lot of episodes, I'm like we can get a lot of content off of this. Uh, if I had like that episode or two to just give myself a break for the week, I'd be like, yes, I'll take it. I would just won't rush and cram the editing, the mixing, and then the posting. I can do that later because we have two episodes in the can that we can just already set to be posted. I'm not too worried about that. Um, but then also like the bad side about that too is you get too comfortable because you're so far ahead, and then when it gets time to get into it, you either just comfortable because you moved on and your schedule takes on other responsibilities around that time, and then you're trying to find a way to get back in the schedule for podcasting, and it's a crazy slope, but it's just doing this like yeah, I'm kind of getting back into that mindset now where I'm like, oh shit, like I need to do this, do that, recording now, but now I don't have to record on Sundays. I can record whenever. Just make sure the episode's posted on Tuesday. There's no significance to me posting the episodes on Tuesday or the episodes coming out on Tuesday. I always just had them come out on Tuesday just because the Rooster Teeth podcast usually came out on Monday when they were streaming it live, and I wanted to take time to just watch that. And I knew if I posted the show at the same time that this is just me like, oh, I don't want to compete with them. So they could do their thing on Monday. On Tuesday, the audio portion gets released, but everyone's already watched on Monday. And so we could just jump in there on Tuesday. Just the people who need something to listen to, like they can find us and give us a listen. Um, but getting into my own podcasting schedule of being a listener and then trying to do all this has been kind of hard, especially since for like 2 years I've had set shows that I've kind of just gotten to their routine. And every time a new episode comes, like some of them post regularly. So whenever an episode's released, it's like, oh man, just cut up on everything else, and we just go ahead and start listening to this and listen to that. It makes the commute go by faster, and sometimes they're very intriguing and informing and enlightening. Other times it's like, I'm just listening to this because I need something to listen to. I'm not interested in the person. I'm not interested in the topic. But, you know, I just don't listen to the radio either. So like Tuesdays still kind of work for me just because like usually Wednesdays are like the main shows that I listen to have their episodes get posted on Wednesdays. So like, okay, cool. Tuesday they get released, and I can just relax and listen to my main shows on Wednesdays. And like even that's a little dangerous too because there's times where I'll be so busy with the wife and running errands and our toddler that it's just like I am behind and I just need to catch up on everything. And that takes away a little bit of time from podcasting because now I'm literally just back to back to back binging all these new episodes I got to catch up on. But podcasting and being on someone else's podcast was definitely a night and day experience. Mainly because if you're wanting to get into podcasting and you want to be the host, you could be a host and a moderator. If it's just going to be you and like one other person, then you can do both. It's probably better for you to do both, just because you yourself can steer where you want the episode to go and the conversations you want to go to hit and the topics you want to hit. Uh, but if it was going to be like three or more, then you could possibly delegate out the moderator uh, responsibility, and all a moderator does is just say, let's stay on topic, or we're going from topic, keeping track of topics, especially if like you kind of go off of like a branching tangent with other people's inputs and stories and side inputs. That's what the moderator does, and it's tough being the host and the moderator because you have to as a host, you have to keep the show going. You have to keep the conversations going. You got to keep the flow of everything going. You try not to have like a dull or a lull or a blank quiet moment on the show. It was easier for us when we started doing some of our video podcasts, just because if we had to stop and gather our words real quick, 'cause I made it a point on my show that I did not want anyone that was on the show to do the while they're talking and trying to gather their thoughts at the same time. It's because it seemed unprofessional. I wanted us to speak and not have to do any of those filler sounds so that way we could sound more professional, seem more professional, and come off as more professional because we just know how to use our words and we know the words to use. We know the right way to say things. Granted, every now and then now, just because it's me, I may still do it here or there, especially if I'm just doing something off the fly. I don't have anything pre-thought out or pre-planned in my head. I will, on the occasion, just bump out the uh, but that's fine. That's just me. And this is just a podcast for fun. We're not trying to get to E3. We're not trying to go to like film festivals. We're not trying to go to like award shows. We're not trying to get our names out there so we can go and cover certain things and go to certain events. This is just me, just being me and chatting. So, but as a moderator, trying to keep up with the conversations and then make all the conversations flow each other into the topic, or make the conversation flow into all the topics you want to hit and the conversations you want to have in a very smooth way, while also trying to keep the energy and the conversation going, is a hard task for anyone to do. Just because there's going to be times where you're not going to be hitting your marks when you need to, or you're going to go a little bit over under. You're going to miss a topic or two at the end of the episode, and it's it's kind of you feel like it's a natural thing, but the more people you have and the more personalities you got to wrangle, it gets a little difficult. And also that kind of changes the dynamic as well. Whereas if you were to just delegate out the moderator responsibility to someone else that you can trust to guide everything that you want to guide to, if there is like a set structure, it's a lot easier. You can just do your part and just talk, conversate, keep everything going, keep the energy high, and that other person can just, hey, yeah, so we want to touch on this, or oh yeah, you mentioned this, and we were gonna start chatting. I also want to chat about this. Just they could throw in their own thing and just steer it. Segue, Segue King is the moderator, Segue King the Queen, because that's mainly what they're going to be doing, and that's kind of what if you're doing both roles by yourself, that's kind of the hard part too, is you're naturally you're giving your input, keeping the conversation going, but then you're also like, oh shit, I need to segue into this, or shit, I need to segue into that, and to pivot or turn this conversation towards this direction now. But but the current topic is still very hot. We're getting a lot of good content off of it. I just got to find a point to interject and then turn it. But then as you also get even more involved in that conversation, it's harder for you to find that point and then harder for you to pivot without being a complete blatant 90-degree turn. So not having that responsibility for being on someone else's show and just being a personality, it's a big like difference. There's no weight, there's no pressure. I've found myself whenever I would be on the Almost Nerds podcast being a lot more relaxed. On my show, I was very, hey, like we're open language. As long as you're not saying anything completely offensive, you can cuss as much as you want. Be very blatant, but we're not trying to do like shock factor or do like a shock and all campaign with the content we're trying to put out, of the topics we want to talk about, of things we want to say or someone else is going to say. So, uh, me trying to sit there and have that personality to say, like, this is the bar that I want. And you can kind of go past the bar if you want, but just don't go too far over the bar. Like, I was the extreme of, like, I'm going to cuss like a shit ton. I'm going to say, drop F bombs. Granted, I wasn't saying, like, I wasn't cussing like 5 times a second or, maybe 10 times a minute. But I was just like, this is just the atmosphere that I kind of want the podcast to have. And, just everyone could just find their own place into it with their personality and just kind of like click themselves in. But being on the Almost Nerds, where it's like, okay, so now this is someone else's show, this is someone else's standards. I can just be me. I can be whoever I want. I could be this other kind of personality than I am that's different from the Austin Guy podcast, or I could just be me and be more relaxed. I don't got to be dialed up to 11 or 12. I can just be dialed in at like a 6 and be fine. Because, my personality kind of meld as a 6 can still meld with everyone else that's on the show. And we can still keep that dynamic. And so was probably, even if you ask Jarrell, like, that's probably one of his favorite parts about podcasting is being on someone else's show so he can just relax and just calm down and just not have to worry about anything because it's someone else's responsibility. It's someone else's show. It's someone else's standards. They wanted him on there. They know what he can bring. He's bringing it. That's all he has to worry about. And it doesn't really like even after you've been doing it for a while, and it that part feels good, it never fully takes you away to where you're just, if you have the drive for it, it never takes you away to the point you never get too complacent with that or comfortable with that to where you're just like, never mind, I'm just gonna stop doing what I'm doing and just be on someone else's show, because it's like a break for you, and you still get to make content with someone else for someone else, doing just your part, and then you can turn around and be like, okay, I've had my break, I've had my breath of fresh air, I've had like my 5 minutes, my 30-minute lunch, whatever you want to equate it to. And now I'm back. I can do this, I can do that, I can, get back to how I want things. Maybe I should change things up. Maybe I can kind of tone it down from 12 to 10 on my podcast, or a 9. And, we can, things can still meld. That it's always good to just get the experiences and views from another person's show that you yourself are learning and taking away, not what you're asking them to teach you and help you take away, but just you have your own experience on someone else's show and then say, okay, I like this. I want more of this. I'm going to I think I have a way where I can implement this for my show, and it doesn't change the content much, but it changes it enough. And you're finding a way to execute it, because as the times change, like even the Rooster Teeth podcast, the cast changes, the topics change, the set changes. Like you're gonna have to change. Your show is gonna have to change at some point, because while you're gonna have a dedicated fan base that likes your format and likes your show and likes the tone and likes everything you're putting out, you're going to be getting older, your views are going to change, and you're going to start getting new audiences, hopefully, if everything's going well, because you're going to be getting new listeners, and these listeners have either never listened to any of your back catalog, they just jumped in where you're at now. So, they never heard your stories, they've never heard your experiences, which comes across on like that podcast, uh, Paradox, I think it was called, where it's like every 3 or 4 years, yes, you'll hear the same story from this episode, and 3 or 4 years later, you'll hear it again on another episode, and it's just because the topic comes up or the instant comes up, and that story pops into the teller's head, and they're like, it's been 3 or 4 years, we have new listeners, we have like, obviously I could just tell it because I know there's people listening right now that haven't heard it, and there's a good amount of people that have heard it, and some of them don't mind hearing it again, but there's new listeners that haven't heard it, so they need to hear it, because some of them probably aren't going to go back and find the episode where it was mentioned and listen to it. And it's also been 3 or 4 years. I don't remember the episode specifically that it was told on. I just remember it was told prior. It's it's a very interesting thing, not just the whole paradox, but just podcasting overall. Again, I'm talking to you about all these things. It's just a very interesting thing to get into, because these get mentioned, especially if you try to look up videos on YouTube, like how to begin podcasting. And you're either listening with an understanding, or you're listening and trying to understand and not grasping anything at all, or grasping very little and trying to like get over and over and over again just so you can kind of make sure you're doing things right. But once you start getting the ball going, and then suddenly everything's clicking in, and you're like, I'm trying to avoid this, and it still happened. The whole podcast paradox. I'm trying to streamline this, but I've ended up making things more complicated. That happens a lot too. I've tried to keep it simple, but now like I need to facilitate growth, and by doing that, it makes things more complex, and it needs more time from me invested in, just so it can stay going smooth. That happens, and that's like a thing that's just never gonna change, because like radio shows used to be that way, and so now like you're podcasting, you're essentially having your own radio show because you're the host, you're putting on a show. it may just be you. It may be you and a few friends, like also on a radio show. The only difference is you may not be playing music every so often in between segments. But I mean, it's not the same, but it's also not that different either. Yeah, like disc jockeys and radio personalities are still going to be disc jockeys and radio personalities because that's the field they got into. That's their career. They've had their experience on that and they've grown from it. But, this is just someone doing it at home, starting from the bottom, and it takes a lot longer. It takes a lot more work if you want to get more results out of it. And then also, fun fact too, one of our friends, me and my cousin, she was trying to help promote us at the beginning, and she tried to get us in with iHeartRadio. And her boss at iHeartRadio said that he would love to sign us, just we needed to interject more music into the show. And I was like, well, that's sweet, but we don't do like a radio show. We want to do a podcast. Like I can interject music, but also there's a lot of like weird things going on at that time with like copyright, DMCA, like licensing, trying to get permissions to use songs, and paying out. Uh, the craziest thing, by the way, that's on this Spotify for Podcasters app is you can do your own radio show, which I saw that and watched the video on how to do it, and I'm like, this is kind of intriguing. You can do what I'm doing now, record your like a segment, and then go onto Spotify because it's a Spotify podcasters for Spotify. But you can use the Spotify search engine to put a song in, or like as many songs as you want in between your segments, and then jump back in and talk about whatever you want to talk about. You literally create your own radio show and you make the playlist. And so that's like pretty interesting. And I'm thinking like around the time, maybe around like April when I'm not commuting for 6 weeks, like maybe I will do that. But I'm like also like I don't know what music to play. I like a lot of varied music and a lot of different genres. So it's kind of hard to just see what mood I'm in at that time and then talk about what I want to talk about. But it's just something to mess around with. It may happen. You never know. We'll see come like mid-April, early May. But yeah, just that the whole podcasting journey has been on my mind today and yesterday. And I'm like, this would be a fun topic to discuss before I jump into the pre-recorded topics I did. Just because it's fresh on my mind and I'm still in shock as to like right now how easy it was to just jump back into it. Especially with Anchor being as easy as to work with as they were before Spotify bought them, and now Spotify bought them, and they kind of made it a little bit easier, a little more user friendly as far as more options that they give you to do and manage. So whenever I open the podcast or whenever I open the app up and it shows like, hey, you've had this many influences, you've had one listener for the week on this episode, like that makes me feel good that people are listening. Even if it's just one, it's like that's still awesome. Someone either just discovered me randomly and decided to hit play, and it didn't give me how long they listened to. It just said someone hit the play button for the week. And it's like that's pretty awesome. I don't have any subscribers just yet, but that's fine too. Um, this is just all for me. But anything that happens from this channel and from you guys is more than appreciated. Uh, but it's been a crazy journey starting it out and coming back to podcasting after so long, and now just having the fun I was having back then again. Solely relying on just myself. May have some people show up and do like some interviews. I do get a little overly ambitious with some of the stuff I kind of want to do where I'm like, oh, it'd be cool. Like, I just found out that some people just ask certain people to get on their show. Like, one girl was like, asked, I guess she met Kane Hodder at a signing, and asked him like, "Hey, can I interview you for my podcast?" And she has like a very, very small podcast, and he said, "Sure." It's cool that some people can just ask those people and they say yes. And like maybe I'll try that if I ever run into someone and get lucky. I have a few people that friends that um, are no big names, but I know they just have really good conversations with. And there's some people I'm like, maybe I'll just reach out to this person and see what they say. Worst they could say is no. And I just continue doing what I'm doing, and they continue doing what they're doing. It's not gonna like make or break the show, but appreciate you all for listening and giving this little podcast, second startup reboot, whatever you want to refer to it as, a chance. And all the growth from it has been very much appreciative. I do like that I get some analytics that I know are just not random ass analytics, like some people in Germany that for whatever reason, like 178 people in Germany that loved us. I actually just get like stateside analytics, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy to see that again. I open the app and I get one viewer. So thank you all for giving me a listen. Thank you all for just giving me like 2 seconds of your day and just saying hi and checking up on you. And if you make it to the end, the hey, take care of yourself. I love you part. It's genuine. It's sincere because you did give me your chance. You did give me a chance. It is very much appreciated. And I really wish nothing but wellness and goodness to all the listeners because y'all giving me a kindness. So until next time, because I just got to work, we'll go back to the pre-recorded podcast. I will still be recording other podcasts around them, so I can still keep ahead with my catalog that I got going on right now. Um, so that way, again, during April, I can have a few weeks where I can just focus on what I need to focus on. And I know the show will be fine, and I'll pick it up when I get back on the road. So, once again, have a great week, y'all. Thanks for joining me on this drive, and I will see you on the next ride.